The smell of gingerbread can't mask the scent of blood. Christmas brings joy to millions, but for these 9 people it brought something far darker. Something that still haunts them every December. I was 28 years old when I learned that some doors should never be answered after midnight. My name is Rachel, and I graduated college in 2011, right when the world was still recovering from economic chaos. By December 2018, I had finally settled into a small rental house in rural Vermont, the kind of place where neighbors are spread far apart and the nearest streetlight is a mile away. Christmas Eve arrived cold and bitter. Snow had been falling since morning, blanketing everything in white silence. I lived alone with my cat, Oliver, and had declined my parents' invitation to visit because work had exhausted me. I wanted one quiet holiday to myself. Around 11 p.m., I made hot chocolate and settled on my couch to watch old movies. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows in their frames. Oliver sat on the armrest, ears twitching at every gust. That's when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My closest neighbor lived half a mile down the road, and no one had called to say they were coming. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. Maybe the wind had knocked something against the door. I returned to my movie. 5 minutes later, the knocks came again. Same rhythm. 3 beats, evenly spaced, patient. This time Oliver's fur stood on end, and he jumped off the couch and disappeared down the hallway. Animals know when something is wrong. I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. My porch light illuminated falling snow and nothing else. No car in the driveway. No footprints leading to or from the door. Just undisturbed white covering everything. The knocking started again while I stood at the window. 3 heavy pounds that made the door shudder in its frame. I stepped back, my heart hammering. Someone was there. Someone I couldn't see. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. The screen showed no signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell tower. My landline sat on the kitchen counter, and I ran for it, lifting the receiver to my ear. Dead silence. The phone line was out too. The knocking stopped. For several minutes, nothing happened. I stood in my kitchen, gripping a knife I'd pulled from the drawer, listening to my own breathing and the wind. Then I heard it, the sound of my doorknob turning. Slowly, testing, seeing if it would open. I had locked it hours ago. I was certain, but I watched from across the room as the knob twisted left, then right, then left again. Someone was trying to get in, and they were taking their time as if they had all night. I ran to the door and checked the deadbolt. Locked, but the knob kept moving, and now I could hear breathing on the other side. Heavy, wet, like someone had been running through the cold. "Who's there?" My voice came out shaky. "I've called the police. They're on their way." The breathing stopped. The doorknob went still. Then a voice answered, muffled by the wood but clear enough to understand. "Let me in, Rachel. It's cold out here." My blood turned to ice. They knew my name. This wasn't random. This wasn't a lost traveler or a confused neighbor. Someone had come here specifically for me. "I don't know you," I said, backing away from the door. "Leave now or I'll." "You do know me." The voice cut me off, calm and certain. "You just don't remember yet. But you will. Open the door." I stared at the wood separating us, my mind racing through faces, names, anyone who might have a reason to be here. Nothing made sense. The voice sounded male but distorted, like someone speaking through cloth. A scraping sound started at the base of the door, metal on wood. I realized whoever it was had begun prying at the bottom of the frame with some kind of tool. Splinters fell onto my welcome mat as the gap widened slightly. I turned and ran for the back door, thinking I could escape through the yard and reach my neighbor's house on foot. But when I grabbed the back door handle, it was already unlocked. I knew I had locked it earlier. I always did. Before I could process what that meant, the door swung open from the outside. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the snow, tall, wearing a heavy coat and a ski mask that covered everything but their eyes. They didn't speak. They just stepped inside, tracking snow across my kitchen floor, and closed the door behind them with a soft click. I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, my socks slipping on the wood. Behind me, footsteps followed at the same calm pace. Not rushing, not chasing, just following because they knew I had nowhere to go. I locked myself in my bedroom and shoved my dresser against the door. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the furniture. Oliver was under the bed, hissing at the shadows. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped outside my door. A shadow stretched across the gap at the bottom, blocking the light from the hallway. Rachel. The voice was clearer now, almost gentle. I've been waiting a long time for this. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. I looked around desperately for anything I could use. My window faced the backyard, a 15-foot drop onto frozen ground. My phone still showed no signal. I was trapped. The doorknob began to turn. Locked. They tried again, harder this time, and the wood around the lock started to crack. The dresser scraped forward an inch. Then another. I grabbed the only thing I could find, a heavy ceramic lamp from my nightstand, and positioned myself behind the dresser. If they came through, I would fight. The door burst open with a splintering crash, and the dresser toppled sideways. The figure filled the doorway, breathing hard now, eyes locked on mine through the holes in the ski mask. They took one step into the room, and I swung the lamp with everything I had. It connected with their shoulder, and they stumbled backward into the hallway with a grunt of pain. I didn't wait. I ran past them, down the stairs, toward the front door. My fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, slick with sweat, and finally it clicked open. I threw the door wide and ran barefoot into the snow. The cold bit into my feet immediately, but I didn't stop. I ran down my driveway, toward the road, screaming for help even though I knew no one would hear me. Behind me, the front door stood open. I looked back once and saw the figure standing on my porch, watching me go. They didn't follow. They just stood there, perfectly still, as snow fell around them. I reached my neighbor's house 20 minutes later, frostbitten and sobbing. They called the police from their working landline, and officers arrived within the hour. They found my house empty. No sign of forced entry beyond the broken bedroom door. No footprints in the snow except mine. The back door was locked from the inside. The front door had been left open, but there was no evidence anyone had been there at all. The police suggested I had experienced a panic attack, maybe a vivid nightmare brought on by stress and isolation. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that someone was in my house that night, someone who knew my name and had been planning this for a long time. I moved out 3 days later and never went back. The landlord eventually found Oliver hiding in the crawl space, traumatized but alive. I still have nightmares about that voice, calm and patient, telling me to open the door. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder who they were and what they wanted. But mostly, I'm just grateful I ran when I did, because I don't think they were there to talk. Story 2. The Mall Santa. My name is Marcus, and I work mall security. I've been doing this job since 2015, right after I graduated with a degree I never used. By December 2019, I thought I'd seen everything: shoplifters, lost kids, medical emergencies, holiday fights over parking spaces. Nothing surprised me anymore, until I met the Santa who wasn't supposed to be there. It was December 23rd, the last Monday before Christmas. The mall was chaos. Families everywhere, crying children, desperate last-minute shoppers. Our Santa's workshop setup sat in the center court, a small cottage surrounded by fake snow and mechanical elves. We'd hired a professional Santa through an agency, friendly guy named Paul who'd been doing this for years. Around 7 p.m., I got a call on my radio. A mother complained that Santa had said something inappropriate to her daughter. I headed to the workshop, expecting to mediate a misunderstanding. Parents sometimes misheard things in the noise. When I arrived, Paul was finishing up with a family, ho-ho-hoing like always. The mother who'd called stood to the side, arms crossed, face pale. I pulled her aside and asked what happened. She said when her daughter sat on Santa's lap, he'd leaned close and whispered, "I know where you live, Emma. I've been watching you sleep." Then he'd laughed and handed her a candy cane like nothing happened. My stomach dropped. I looked back at Paul, who was now waving at the next family in line. That wasn't Paul's voice I heard. It was higher-pitched, younger. I walked closer, studying the Santa in the chair. Same red suit, same white beard, same black boots. But something was off. The beard sat crooked. The gloves were different, dirty where Paul's had been pristine. And the eyes were wrong. Paul had kind blue eyes. These were dark, cold, watching me approach with amusement. "Hey," I said quietly, "can I talk to you for a second?" The Santa stood up slowly, towering over me. Paul was maybe 5'9". This guy was well over 6 feet. He leaned down and whispered in my ear, "You should tell them to go home, Marcus. It's not safe here tonight." He knew my name. I'd never seen this person before in my life. I stepped back and reached for my radio, but he moved faster than I expected. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard enough to make my fingers go numb. Up close, I could see the makeup caked on his face, poorly applied to make him look older. The beard was attached with spirit gum that hadn't dried properly. "Where's Paul?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The fake Santa smiled, his teeth too white and too straight. "Paul's taking a break. I'm covering his shift." "That's not how this works. I'm going to need you to come with me." He released my wrist and took a step back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Of course, officer. Lead the way." We walked toward the security office, him following close behind. Too close. I could hear him breathing, slow and deliberate, like he was savoring something. My radio crackled with routine check-ins from other guards, and I was about to call for backup when he spoke again. "Do you ever wonder what's in the back rooms, Marcus? The places customers don't see." I didn't answer. We were almost at the office, just 20 more feet. "I do," he continued. "I've been exploring all day, found some interesting things. Found Paul, for example." My blood went cold. I stopped walking and turned to face him. "What did you do?" He tilted his head, the Santa hat slipping sideways. He wouldn't give me his suit. I had to insist. I ran, sprinting through the mall, shouting into my radio for backup, my heart slamming against my ribs. Behind me, I heard laughter. Not the jolly mall Santa kind. Something sharp and broken. I reached the employee corridors and burst through the door, racing past storage rooms and break areas. Paul usually parked in the back lot. His changing room was near the loading dock. The door was open. Inside, the Santa suit lay crumpled on the floor, covered in dark stains. Paul sat slumped against the wall, conscious but barely. Blood seeped from a gash on his head, and his hands were bound with tinsel. "He came out of nowhere," Paul mumbled. "Just wanted the suit." I called for an ambulance and turned back toward the corridor. The fake Santa stood in the doorway, blocking my exit. He'd removed the beard. His face was younger than I'd thought, maybe mid-30s, with hollow cheeks and eyes that didn't blink enough. Everyone's so trusting during Christmas, he said. They see the suit and they just believe. Security arrived before he could do anything else. For guards, including my supervisor, the man didn't fight. He just stood there, smiling, as they cuffed him. Police found a bag in one of the storage rooms. Inside were zip ties, duct tape, and a list of names, all children who'd visited Santa that day. Addresses, too. He'd been collecting information for hours. Paul survived. The guy was arrested and charged with assault, impersonation, and a dozen other things. Turned out he had a history of stalking, multiple restraining orders, and he'd been fired from a mall Santa job 3 years prior. I quit 2 months later. Couldn't stand the holiday decorations, the music, the crowds. Every time I see a mall Santa now, I look for the signs. The wrong height, the wrong voice, the eyes that watch a little too carefully. Because sometimes the monster wears a red suit and a smile, and no one notices until it's too late. Story 3. The Christmas Carol. My name is David, and I used to love Christmas music. Past tense. That changed one night in December 2020, during the pandemic when everyone was isolated and desperate for any connection. I lived alone in a third-floor apartment in Portland, working from home and barely leaving except for groceries. My building was old, built in the 1960s with thin walls and drafty windows. I could hear my neighbors' conversations, their TV shows, their footsteps at all hours. On December 19th, around 11 p.m., I heard singing. A woman's voice coming from somewhere in the building. She was singing Silent Night in a clear, beautiful soprano that echoed through the walls. I smiled at first, thinking it was nice. A little holiday spirit in an otherwise depressing year. The singing continued for about 5 minutes, then stopped. I went back to scrolling through my phone and thought nothing of it. The next night, same time, it started again. Silent Night. Same voice, same hauntingly perfect pitch. But this time, it lasted longer. 15 minutes of the same song, repeating verse after verse, never stopping for breath. By the third night, I was annoyed. It was past 11 p.m., and the singing had become a nightly occurrence. Always Silent Night. Always the same woman. I knocked on the wall, hoping she'd get the hint. The singing stopped immediately. Then it started again, louder and closer. I got up and pressed my ear to the wall, trying to pinpoint which apartment it was coming from. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Above me, beside me, below me. Impossible to locate. On the fourth night, I decided to find her and politely ask her to stop. I walked the hallways, listening at each door. The singing continued, but I couldn't find the source. Every door I checked, every apartment I stood outside of, the voice seemed to be coming from somewhere else. One of my neighbors, an elderly man named Roger, opened his door and asked what I was doing. I explained about the singing. He looked at me strangely and said he hadn't heard anything. That night, the singing lasted an hour. Same song, over and over, the voice never tiring or wavering. I put in earplugs and tried to sleep, but I could still hear it, muffled but persistent, drilling into my skull. By the seventh night, I was barely sleeping. The singing had invaded my thoughts. I'd catch myself humming Silent Night at random moments during the day, unable to stop. It was like an earworm that had burrowed too deep. That night, I decided to record it. If no one else could hear it, maybe I was losing my mind, but at least I'd have proof. I set up my phone to record and waited. At 11 p.m. exactly, the singing began. I checked the recording. Nothing. Just silence and the ambient noise of my apartment. But I could hear her so clearly, every word perfect and cold. I started researching the building's history. What I found made my hands shake. In 1998, a woman named Carol Brennan had lived in my apartment. She was a singer, classically trained, who performed at churches during the holidays. On December 24th, she was found dead in the bathtub, wrists slit. Neighbors said they'd heard her singing Silent Night all night for hours before the police arrived. The landlord had never mentioned this. The previous tenant had moved out suddenly after only 3 months. No explanation given. I decided I was done. I'd break my lease and leave. But that night, December 24th, the singing changed. At 11 p.m., it started as usual. Silent night. But after the first verse, the voice shifted. It became desperate, anguished, like someone crying while singing. The words slurred together, broken by sobs. Then I heard my name. David. The voice sang, weaving it into the melody. David, can you hear me? David, why won't you help me? I stood frozen in my living room, every hair on my body standing straight. The voice was right behind me now. I could feel breath on my neck, cold and damp. I spun around. Nothing there. But the singing continued, inches from my face. The words begging, pleading. Help me, David. I'm still here. I never left. Please, help me. I ran, grabbed my keys, my phone, and bolted from the apartment without looking back. I spent Christmas in a motel, too terrified to return. When I finally went back with a friend to collect my things, the apartment was silent. No singing, no presents, just empty rooms and the faint smell of something floral and rotten. I moved out within a week. The landlord didn't ask questions, probably relieved I wasn't going to make trouble. I later learned that apartment has had 17 tenants in the past 20 years. None stayed longer than 6 months. I still hear the singing sometimes, late at night when I'm alone. Silent Night playing somewhere in the distance, just out of reach. And I wonder if Carol is still there, still trapped, still singing the same song she sang the night she died. Story 4. The Neighborhood Lights. I'm Jennifer, and I've lived in the same suburban neighborhood outside of Cleveland for 8 years. Every December, our street goes all out with Christmas decorations, lights, inflatables, synchronized displays. It's beautiful. Families drive from miles away just to see our block lit up like something out of a movie. But in December 2021, something appeared that didn't belong. It started on December 12th. I was walking my dog around 8 p.m. when I noticed a house at the end of the street that I'd never paid attention to before. It sat slightly apart from the others, set back from the road with overgrown hedges blocking most of the view. The house was decorated, but not like the others. No cheerful colors, no Santas or reindeer, just white lights, thousands of them, covering every inch of the house, the roof, the trees, the yard. So bright it hurt to look at directly. And in the center of the yard, illuminated by spotlights, was a nativity scene. But something was wrong with it. The figures were too tall, too thin, their proportions distorted. The Mary figure had its head tilted at an impossible angle. The baby in the manger looked too large, almost adult-sized. I slowed down as I walked past, my dog pulling at the leash, whining to keep moving. The lights hummed, a low electrical buzz that vibrated in my chest, and I could swear the figures were watching me. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Tom, the next day. He looked confused. What house? The Parker's place. They moved out in October. It's been empty since. I insisted I'd seen it. He walked to the end of the street with me that evening, and we stood looking at the house. It was completely dark. No lights, no decorations. Just an empty house with a for sale sign in the yard. But that night, at 8 p.m., the lights came on again. I stood at my window and watched them blaze to life, flooding the street with white light. The nativity scene stood in the yard, figures perfectly still. I walked down there alone, telling myself I was being ridiculous. As I got closer, I realized the figures weren't made of plastic or wood. They were too detailed. The Mary figure had hair, real hair, hanging in tangled clumps. The shepherd's face had skin that looked waxy and wrong. I stepped onto the lawn, the grass crunching under my feet. The buzzing was louder here, making my ears ring. I reached out to touch the Mary figure, and its head turned. Not its body, just its head, rotating slowly until it faced me. The eyes were glass, painted on, but they followed my movement. I ran, didn't look back, didn't stop until I was inside my house with every door locked. The next morning, I called the police, told them someone was trespassing on the property, using it for some kind of disturbing display. An officer went to check it out. He called me an hour later and said the house was empty. No lights, no decorations, no nativity scene. Just an abandoned property. But every night at 8 p.m., the lights came on. And every night, the figures changed positions. The shepherd moved closer to the street. The baby grew larger in the manger. Mary's head was always turned, always watching whichever direction I approached from. Other neighbors started noticing. Some thought it was beautiful, mysterious. They took pictures and posted them online. But a few, like me, felt something was deeply wrong. On December 24th, I decided to go inside the house. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove to myself it was just a prank, that someone was messing with us all. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was freezing, colder than outside. Every room was empty except for one, the living room. In the center of the floor was a large wooden nativity set, the kind you'd buy at a craft store. Normal-sized, perfectly ordinary. But arranged around it were photographs, dozens of them pinned to the walls. Pictures of people standing in front of the house at night, their faces lit by the white lights. I recognized some of them, neighbors, visitors who'd come to see the display. And in every photo, standing just behind the person, barely visible in the shadows, was a tall, thin figure with its head tilted at an impossible angle. I left and never went back. The house was torn down in March 2022. The lot sat empty for over a year before someone finally bought it and built something new. I don't walk that street anymore. And every December, when the neighborhood lights go up, I make sure to check. Just in case the white lights come back. Just in case the figures reappear, watching, waiting for the next person to get too close. Story 5: The Christmas Party. In December 2016, I was 25 and working my first real corporate job in Chicago. The company threw a massive Christmas party every year, open bar, catered food, a DJ, the whole deal. It was held at a rented event space downtown. A converted warehouse with exposed brick and dim lighting meant to look sophisticated. I didn't know many people yet. I'd been there only 4 months, still learning names and trying to fit in. But I went anyway, figuring it would be good for networking. The party was crowded, loud, and overwhelming. I grabbed a drink and found a quiet corner near the back, watching people dance and laugh. Around 9 p.m., a woman approached me, mid-30s, professional, wearing a dark red dress. She introduced herself as Linda from accounting. We chatted for about 20 minutes. She was friendly, asked about my role, made small talk about the company. Then she leaned close and said something that still makes my skin crawl. "You should leave, now, before it starts." I laughed, thinking she was joking. Before what starts? Her expression didn't change. "You'll know. Just go. Trust me." She walked away and disappeared into the crowd before I could ask what she meant. I looked around for her later but never saw her again that night. I should have listened. I should have grabbed my coat and left right then. But I didn't. I stayed, telling myself she was just drunk or playing some weird joke. I got another drink and tried to enjoy myself, pushing her warning to the back of my mind. Around 10 p.m., I noticed a man standing near the DJ booth. He was wearing a Santa suit, which seemed odd because the party wasn't particularly Christmas-themed beyond some decorations. No one had mentioned entertainment. He just stood there watching the crowd, his hands hanging at his sides. I asked a coworker if the company had hired a Santa for photos or something. She looked confused and said no, there was no Santa on the schedule. When I pointed to where he'd been standing, the spot was empty. Around 11 p.m., the lights went out. Everyone assumed it was part of the entertainment, maybe a surprise performance. But the emergency exit signs stayed dark too. Complete blackness. Then the screaming started. Not playful, not drunk people being loud. Real screaming. Panic. I heard glass shatter. People shoving past me in the dark. Running toward where the exits should be. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on something that made no sense. A man stood in the center of the room, perfectly still, wearing a Santa suit. Blood covered the front of the white trim. He was holding something in his hands. A knife, long and serrated, dripping onto the floor. Around him, people were on the ground, not moving. I counted for maybe 5 bodies, collapsed where they'd been dancing moments before. The man's head turned slowly in my direction, and even in the phone's weak light, I could see his eyes. Empty, mechanical, like he wasn't really seeing me, just registering my presence. I ran. So did everyone else who was still standing. We poured out of the emergency exits, spilling into the freezing alley behind the building. Someone called 911. Police and ambulances arrived within minutes. The scene outside was chaos. People crying, throwing up, calling loved ones. Some had blood on their clothes from trying to help the victims. Others just stood in shock, staring at nothing. When officers entered the building, they found 5 people dead, stabbed multiple times. The man in the Santa suit was gone. No trace. The knife was left behind, wiped clean. I spent hours at the police station that night, giving my statement over and over. They asked about Linda, about her warning. I described her as best I could. Mid-30s, dark red dress, professional demeanor, said she worked in accounting. The next day, they told me there was no Linda in accounting. No one by that name had ever worked at the company. They showed me photos of every female employee. None of them was the woman I'd spoken to. Security footage was corrupted. Every camera in the building had malfunctioned at the same time, recording only static from 11 p.m. onward. The one camera outside, covering the alley, showed people fleeing the building but never showed anyone in a Santa suit leaving. Witnesses gave conflicting descriptions. Some said he was tall, others said short. Some remembered the Santa suit clearly. Others swore he'd been wearing normal clothes. The only thing everyone agreed on was the blood and the bodies. The investigation dragged on for months. They questioned everyone who'd been at the party, reviewed financial records, looked into disgruntled former employees. Nothing led anywhere. The man in the Santa suit had apparently appeared out of nowhere, killed 5 people, and vanished without leaving a single useful clue. The victims were random. No connection to each other beyond working at the same company. Different departments, different ages, different backgrounds. 2 men, 3 women. The youngest was 23, the oldest was 47. No pattern that investigators could find. I started having nightmares. Every night, I'd dream about that moment when my phone's light landed on him. The Santa suit, the blood, those empty eyes. Sometimes in the dreams, he'd start walking toward me, slow and deliberate, and I'd wake up screaming. I went to therapy. My therapist said I had PTSD, which seemed obvious. She prescribed medication, taught me breathing exercises, told me it would get better with time. Didn't. 3 months after the party, I quit my job. I couldn't walk into that office anymore, couldn't look at my coworkers without thinking about the ones who didn't make it. The company was understanding. They gave me a severance package and wished me well. The case went cold within 6 months. The police had no leads, no suspects, no evidence that pointed in any useful direction. The murders were filed away as unsolved, and the media moved on to the next tragedy. The company shut down the following year, unable to recover from the incident. No one wanted to work there. No clients wanted to be associated with the place where 5 people were murdered at a Christmas party. I moved to a different city, started over with a new job, tried to rebuild my life. But every December, when the Christmas decorations go up and the party invitations arrive, I'm back in that warehouse. I'm standing in the dark, phone light cutting through the blackness, watching a man in a Santa suit turn his head slowly toward me. I still think about Linda, about her warning, about how she knew something was going to happen. Was she involved? Was she trying to save me? Or was she something else entirely? Something I'll never understand? The most terrifying part isn't what happened that night. It's knowing that the person who did it is still out there. He's never been caught. He's never been identified. And every Christmas, I wonder if he's doing it again. If somewhere else, in some other city, another party is happening. Another person is standing in the dark with a knife. Another Linda is warning someone to leave before it's too late. I'll never attend another work Christmas party. And every December, when invitations arrive, I politely decline. Because some celebrations aren't meant to be survived. And some warnings should never be ignored. Story 6. The Christmas Card. My name is Allison, and in December 2019, I received a Christmas card that changed everything I thought I knew about safety and privacy. I had just turned 30 that November, working as a freelance graphic designer from my apartment in Seattle. I lived alone in a second-floor unit of a converted house, the kind of place with hardwood floors and large windows that let in lots of natural light. The card arrived on December 10th, mixed in with my regular mail. No return address, just my name and address written in neat, careful handwriting. The envelope was red with a small snowflake sticker sealing it shut. I almost threw it away, assuming it was junk mail or maybe a card from a client I didn't remember. But something made me open it. Inside was a standard Christmas card, the kind you buy in bulk at a drugstore. A snowy scene with a cottage and the words, "Season's Greetings," in gold foil. When I opened it, a photograph fell out and landed face up on my kitchen table. It was a photo of me, sitting in my living room, on my couch, wearing the same pajamas I'd worn the night before, taken through my window. My hands started shaking. I picked up the photo and studied it, hoping I was wrong, hoping it was somehow old or from a different time. But no, I recognized everything. The book I'd been reading, left open on the coffee table. The mug of tea still sitting there. The blanket draped over the arm of the couch. This photo had been taken less than 24 hours ago. Below the photo, written in the same neat handwriting, was a message, "Merry Christmas. I'm closer than you think." I dropped the card and backed away from the table, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Someone had been outside my window last night. Someone had been watching me. Someone had taken my picture without me knowing. I ran to the living room and looked at the window. It faced the backyard, which was shared with the other units in the house. Trees lined the property, providing privacy from the street. But that also meant someone could stand back there without being seen from the road. I grabbed my phone and called the police. They arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman, who listened to my story and examined the card. They asked if I had any ex-boyfriends, anyone who might be stalking me, anyone I'd rejected recently. I didn't. My last relationship had ended amicably over a year ago. I kept to myself, worked from home, didn't socialize much. I couldn't think of anyone who would do this. The officers searched the backyard but found nothing. No footprints, no disturbed ground, nothing to indicate someone had been standing there. They took the card and photograph as evidence and told me to keep my curtains closed, maybe stay with a friend for a few days. I didn't have many friends in Seattle. I'd moved there for work 2 years earlier and hadn't really connected with anyone. My family lived across the country. I was alone. That night, I closed all my curtains and double-checked every lock. I tried to sleep but kept imagining someone standing outside, watching, waiting. Every sound made me jump. The house settling, the wind in the trees, a car passing on the street. The second card arrived 3 days later. Same red envelope, same careful handwriting. Inside was another photo. This time I was in my kitchen making breakfast. The angle suggested it had been taken from the side window, the one above my sink. I was pouring coffee, completely unaware I was being photographed. The message read, "You look beautiful in the morning. I love watching you wake up." I called the police again. The same officers came out, and I could see the concern on their faces now. This wasn't a one-time thing. Someone was actively stalking me, documenting my daily routine. They increased patrols in my area, drove by every few hours. They suggested I install security cameras, which I did that same day. I put one covering the backyard, one covering the side of the house, and one inside pointing at my front door. For a week, nothing happened. No more cards. No signs of anyone watching. The cameras recorded nothing unusual. I started to relax, thinking maybe the police presence had scared them off. Then I received the third card. This one had no photo, just a message, "Cameras won't help. I'm always watching." My blood ran cold. Whoever this was knew about the cameras. They'd seen me install them. They were still watching. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. I moved to the living room, keeping all the lights on, jumping at every sound. My work suffered. I couldn't concentrate. Every notification on my phone made me panic, thinking it might be another card, another message, another sign that this person was still out there. On December 20th, I woke up on my couch at 3 a.m. to the sound of something scraping against my window. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera app, but the backyard camera showed nothing. Just an empty yard, trees swaying in the wind. The scraping sound came again. I realized it was coming from my bedroom window, the one the camera didn't cover. I called 911 and huddled in the corner of my living room, holding a kitchen knife, waiting for the police. When they arrived, they found fresh scratches on my bedroom window, like someone had been trying to pry it open. The window was locked, but the frame was old, and the lock wasn't very strong. If they'd tried harder, they could have gotten in. The officer in charge, a detective named Sarah Morrison, pulled me aside and told me I needed to leave. This person was escalating. They'd gone from watching to attempting to break in. It wasn't safe for me to stay there anymore. I packed a bag that night and checked into a hotel. I told the detective where I'd be, but I didn't tell anyone else. I even turned off my phone's location services, paranoid that somehow this person might track me. For 2 days, I felt safe. The hotel was downtown, busy, lots of people around. No one knew I was there. I started to breathe again. On December 23rd, a card was slipped under my hotel room door. I didn't see who delivered it. I'd been in the bathroom. When I came out, the red envelope was lying on the floor, just inside my room. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a photo of me walking into the hotel lobby 2 days earlier. The message read, "You can't hide from Christmas. See you soon." I grabbed my bag and ran out of that room. I didn't check out. Didn't stop at the front desk, just ran to my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move. I ended up at a police station, hysterical, showing Detective Morrison the new card. She looked at it and then at me, and I could see she was scared too. This person had followed me to the hotel. They knew where I was at all times. This wasn't just stalking anymore. This was something worse. Detective Morrison helped me file for an emergency protective order, though we both knew it was useless when we didn't know who we were protecting me from. She helped me find a women's shelter, a place with security, where I could stay until after Christmas. I spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day in that shelter, surrounded by strangers, trying not to cry every time I thought about the life I'd had before the first card arrived. The life where I felt safe in my own home. After Christmas, Detective Morrison called me. They'd reviewed security footage from the hotel. A man in a delivery uniform had been seen near my floor around the time the card was delivered, but his face was obscured by a cap, and he'd avoided the cameras. They had no ID, no useful information. The card stopped after that. No more appeared. No more photos. No more messages. It's been 3 years now, and nothing else has happened. But I've never felt safe again. I moved to a different city. Changed my name. I don't have social media. I keep my curtains closed even during the day. I check every room before I sleep. And every December, when Christmas cards start arriving, I throw them away without opening them. Because I know somewhere out there, the person who took those photos is still watching, still waiting. And maybe one Christmas they'll decide it's time to do more than just send cards. Story 7. The Gift Exchange. Every year, my office did a Secret Santa gift exchange. It was one of those corporate traditions that everyone pretended to enjoy but secretly dreaded. In December 2018, I worked at a mid-sized marketing firm in Austin, Texas. I'd been there about 2 years, long enough to know most people but not long enough to feel like I really belonged. My name is Rebecca, and I graduated college in 2012, spent a few years bouncing between jobs before landing at this company. The work was fine, the people were fine, everything was just fine. Boring and predictable. The Secret Santa drawing happened on December 3rd. We all gathered in the conference room, drew names from a hat, and were told to keep it secret until the exchange party on December 21st. The spending limit was $25, and gifts were supposed to be thoughtful but appropriate for a work environment. I drew a coworker named Steven. I barely knew him. He worked in IT, kept to himself, rarely spoke in meetings. I'd maybe exchanged 10 words with him in 2 years. But I figured a gift card would be safe and easy, so I bought a $25 Starbucks card, wrapped it nicely, and didn't think about it again. The exchange party was held in the break room after work hours. People brought cookies and wine, someone put on Christmas music, and we took turns opening gifts. Most were generic candles, coffee mugs, bottles of wine. Nothing surprising. When it was my turn, I picked up the box with my name on it. It was larger than the others, wrapped in plain brown paper with no card, no decoration. I opened it carefully, aware that everyone was watching. Inside was a VHS tape. No label, no writing, just a blank tape in a plastic case. I held it up, confused. A VHS tape? People laughed, assuming it was some kind of joke. VHS tapes were obsolete. No one used them anymore. I looked around the room, trying to figure out who my Secret Santa was, but everyone's face looked equally amused and confused. Who even owns a VCR anymore? Someone joked. I laughed along with everyone else, but something about the gift felt wrong. The tape was old, the plastic case worn and scratched. This wasn't something you'd buy as a joke. This was something someone had kept. After the party, I asked around, trying to figure out who had drawn my name. No one would tell me that was the point of Secret Santa. But I noticed Steven had left early, before the gifts were even finished being opened. I should have thrown the tape away. I should have just dropped it in the trash and forgotten about it. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know what was on it. I spent 2 days looking for a VCR. Finally found one at a thrift store for $8. Bought it, took it home, and hooked it up to my TV. The whole thing felt ridiculous, but I'd committed to the mystery at this point. I put the tape in and pressed play. Static filled the screen for a few seconds. Then the image cleared. It was footage of my apartment. My living room, specifically. The camera was positioned low, maybe on a shelf or a table, pointing toward my couch. I was sitting there watching TV, eating dinner. I watched myself for about 5 minutes, completely unaware I was being filmed. The timestamp in the corner read 2 months earlier, October 12th. My stomach dropped. I paused the tape and sat there staring at the frozen image of myself. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had set up a camera and recorded me without my knowledge. I fast-forwarded. More footage. Me working on my laptop. Me talking on the phone. Me getting up and walking out of frame. Hours of footage, all from different days, all from different angles. Someone had moved the camera around my apartment, filming me in different rooms. The bedroom footage made me want to vomit. Me getting dressed. Me sleeping. Me doing things I wouldn't want anyone to see, private things, intimate things. I stopped the tape and sat in the dark, shaking. Someone at my office had done this. Someone I worked with every day had broken into my apartment, set up hidden cameras, and recorded me for weeks or maybe months. I called the police. They came to my apartment, took the tape as evidence, asked me the same questions I'd asked myself. Who had access to my apartment? Had I noticed anything missing or moved? Had any work been done on the building that might explain someone having keys? I couldn't think of anything. My building was secure, required key fob access. I'd never given anyone my keys. Maintenance only came when I requested it, and I was always home when they did. The detectives asked about the Secret Santa exchange. I told them about Steven, about how he'd left early, about how I barely knew him. They ran his name, checked his background. Nothing came up. No criminal record, no red flags. Just a quiet IT guy who kept to himself. They went to question him at work the next day, but he wasn't there. His supervisor said Steven had called in sick that morning. When detectives went to his apartment, he was gone. The place was cleared out like he'd never lived there at all. They searched his apartment anyway and found a room full of equipment. Cameras, recording devices, hard drives, and photos. Hundreds of photos of women. Some I recognized from work, others I didn't. All of them seemed to be candid shots, taken without the subject knowing. But they never found Steven. He'd disappeared completely. No credit card transactions, no phone records, no trace. It was like he'd planned his escape in advance, knowing eventually someone would figure out what he'd been doing. The company fired him, obviously. They sent out a memo about the situation, offered counseling to anyone who needed it. Several women came forward saying they'd felt uncomfortable around Steven, that he'd stared at them or shown up in places he shouldn't have been. But no one had reported it because it never seemed serious enough to make a formal complaint. I moved out of my apartment the following month. I couldn't stay there knowing he'd been inside, knowing he'd touched my things, set up his cameras, watched me while I slept. Every corner of that place felt contaminated. The investigation went nowhere. Steven had used a fake name when he was hired, fake references, fake everything. The person we knew as Steven didn't exist. His real identity was never discovered. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, doing the same thing to someone else. Setting up cameras, watching, recording, collecting his footage like trophies. The police said they'd found evidence of at least a dozen other victims. Women he'd filmed in different cities over several years. I don't do Secret Santa anymore. I don't participate in office parties. And I check my apartment obsessively, looking for cameras, for any sign that someone has been inside. I've become paranoid, and I hate it, but I can't stop. Because I know now how easy it is for someone to invade your privacy. How someone can be watching you for months without you having any idea. How the person sitting 3 desks away might be collecting footage of you sleeping, and you'd never know until it's too late. The VHS tape is still somewhere in a police evidence locker. Sometimes I think about it, about all that footage of me living my life, completely unaware. And I wonder what else he recorded that wasn't on that tape. What else he might have kept for himself. Story 8. The Christmas Tree Lot. In December 2017, I went to a tree lot alone late one evening. My name is Daniel, and I'd just gone through a bad breakup that had left me living by myself in a rental house outside of Portland, Oregon. I graduated college in 2010, and by 2017, I'd settled into a comfortable but somewhat isolated life. It was December 18th, around 7:30 p.m., when I decided I wanted a real Christmas tree. I'd been putting it off, not feeling particularly festive, but something about the empty corner in my living room finally got to me. I drove to one of those small tree lots set up in an empty parking lot, the kind run by a couple of guys trying to make extra money during the holidays. When I arrived, the lot was nearly empty. Most of the good trees had already been picked over, and only 2 guys were working. One middle-aged man at the payment shed and a younger guy, probably early 20s, walking around adjusting trees and sweeping up fallen needles. The lot was poorly lit, just a few strings of work lights hanging between posts, casting long shadows across the rows of trees. I walked through the aisles, pulling branches aside, trying to find something decent. The air smelled like pine sap and cold mud. I found a tree near the back of the lot, a decent Fraser fir about 6 feet tall. As I was inspecting it, making sure it wasn't too sparse on one side, I noticed something carved into the trunk. Deep gouges in the wood, forming letters. Help me. Below it was a date. That same day, December 18th, 2017. I stepped back, confused. It looked fresh, the wood underneath still lighter than the bark. Someone had carved this recently, maybe even earlier that same day. I called out to the younger worker who was a few rows over. Hey, did someone vandalize this tree? He walked over, looked at it, and shrugged. Kids probably. We get teenagers messing around sometimes, carving stuff into the trees. It happens. He didn't seem concerned at all, just annoyed that merchandise had been damaged. But something about it bothered me. The carving was too deliberate, too deep. And the date. Why would someone carve today's date? That seemed too specific to be a prank. You sure? I asked. This seems pretty fresh. He shrugged again. It's just kids, man. You want the tree or not? I told him no and moved on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I walked through a few more rows, not really looking at trees anymore, just thinking about that carving. That's when I found the second one. Different tree, same message. Help ME carved into the trunk, with the same date. This one was even deeper, more frantic looking, like whoever had done it had been in a hurry or desperate. I went back to the payment shed where the older man was sitting, reading a newspaper. Hey, I found 2 trees with Help Me carved into them, along with today's date. That doesn't seem like kids messing around. He looked up from his paper, his expression hard to read. Where'd you see them? I pointed toward the back of the lot. He stood up slowly, too slowly, like he was thinking about something. Show me. We walked back together, me leading him to the first tree. When we got there, the carving was still there, exactly as I'd seen it. He studied it for a long moment, then looked around the lot like he was checking if anyone else was nearby. That's weird, he finally said. "We just got these trees in yesterday. Must have happened at the farm before we picked them up." That didn't make sense. If the carving had happened at the farm, the date wouldn't be today. Someone had done this here at this lot. "What about the other one I found?" I asked. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What other one?" I led him to the second tree. But when we got there, the carving was gone. The trunk was smooth. No sign of any damage. I stared at it, confused, knowing I'd seen it just minutes ago. "I swear it was here," I said. "Same message, same date." The man looked at me with something between pity and suspicion. "Maybe you saw the same tree twice, got turned around. The rows all looked the same." I knew I hadn't. I'd found 2 different trees in 2 different sections. But I could tell he didn't believe me. And honestly, I was starting to doubt myself. "Look," he said, his tone a bit firmer now. "If you're not buying a tree, I need to ask you to leave. We're closing soon." I wanted to argue, wanted to demand he search the lot or call the police or something. But I also felt foolish. Maybe I had gotten confused. Maybe it was the same tree and I just walked in a circle. I left without buying anything and drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. When I got home, I searched online for "Help Me" carved into tree, along with Portland and missing persons. What I found made my hands go cold. There was an active missing person case. A woman named Sarah Vickers, 28 years old, had disappeared 3 days earlier on December 15th. She'd been last seen leaving work in the evening. Her car was found abandoned near the same area where the tree lot was set up. I immediately called the police and reported what I'd seen. Gave them the address of the lot, described the carving, told them about the missing woman whose case I'd found online. They took it seriously. 2 officers met me at the lot within an hour. By then, it was after 9 p.m. and the lot was closed, but the police had the owner open it back up. We walked through every row of trees, checking trunks, looking for carvings. We didn't find anything. No "Help Me" messages, no dates, nothing carved into any of the trees. The officers checked with the owners, asked about their employees, asked if they'd noticed anything unusual. Everything checked out. The older man from earlier told police I'd seemed agitated, that I'd claimed to see things that weren't there, and that he'd asked me to leave because I was making him uncomfortable. I felt like I was losing my mind. I knew what I'd seen. The carvings had been real, but without any evidence, the police couldn't do anything. As they were wrapping up, one of the officers pulled me aside. "We're going to search the property anyway, just in case. There's an old storage building behind the lot, and some vehicles parked back there. We'll check it out." I waited in my car, watching as they searched. About 20 minutes later, I saw them bring someone out in handcuffs. The younger worker, the one who'd dismissed the carving as kids vandalizing trees. The next day, the news reported that police had found a missing woman locked in a storage container behind the tree lot. She'd been there for 3 days, bound and gagged, barely alive. Her captor was the young worker at the lot, who'd been using the location to hold her while he figured out what to do next. Sarah had managed to escape her restraints briefly while he was working the lot earlier that day. She'd found a tool, carved messages into 2 trees she could reach from the container, hoping someone would see them and understand. But before she could finish or escape completely, he'd caught her and moved her back. When I'd told him about the carvings, he'd panicked. He'd removed the second carving while I was gone, hoping to make it look like I'd been confused or seeing things. It had almost worked. If I hadn't called the police, if that officer hadn't decided to search the property anyway, Sarah would have died there. The young man eventually confessed that he'd been planning to kill her that night and dump her body somewhere remote. Sarah survived. She recovered physically, though I can't imagine what she went through emotionally. I never met her, never spoke to her. I read about her recovery in the news and was just grateful she made it. The young man, his name was Eric Hollis, was convicted and sentenced to 35 years in prison. The older man who ran the lot claimed he had no idea what Eric had been doing, and police believed him. He shut down the lot after that, couldn't continue knowing what had happened there. I didn't get a Christmas tree that year. I left the corner of my living room empty and tried not to think about how close Sarah came to dying because someone dismissed her cry for help as vandalism. Every December, I drive past that empty lot. It's never been used again, just an abandoned patch of asphalt with faded paint lines. And I think about those carvings, about how desperately she must have been trying to reach someone, anyone, before it was too late. I'm grateful I trusted my instincts. Grateful I called the police even when I doubted what I'd seen. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones where the horror is real, and the only thing standing between life and death is someone willing to pay attention. Story 9. The Christmas Morning. Last year, December 25th, 2023, I woke up on Christmas morning to something that still makes my skin crawl. My name is Tyler, and I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Denver, Colorado. I'm 32, work in software development, and I've lived by myself since I graduated college in 2014. I don't have family nearby. My parents passed away when I was in my 20s, and I'm an only child. I have friends, but we're all at that age where everyone's busy with their own families during the holidays. So I've gotten used to spending Christmas alone. It's not sad or depressing, it's just my normal. On Christmas Eve, I'd gone to bed around midnight after watching some movies and having a couple of drinks. Nothing unusual. I'd placed a few gifts for myself under my small tree, things I'd bought online over the past few weeks. A new gaming headset, some books, a nice jacket I'd been wanting. I know it sounds sad to buy your own Christmas presents, but it made the morning feel a little more special. When I woke up around 8 a.m. on Christmas morning, something felt off immediately. I walked into my living room and stopped dead. All my presents were unwrapped. Every single one. The wrapping paper had been carefully removed, not torn. Each gift had been opened, examined, and then rewrapped. I could tell because the paper was put back on differently, the tape in different spots, the folds not quite matching how I'd originally wrapped them. I stood there in my pajamas, staring at the tree, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had I gotten drunk last night and unwrapped them myself? No, I'd only had 2 beers. I remembered going to bed clearly, remembered checking that the door was locked. I picked up one of the gifts, the gaming headset. I carefully peeled back the paper. Someone had already opened the box inside, taken the headset out and put it back. Not stolen, just examined. My hands were shaking as I opened the rest. Every gift was the same. Opened, inspected, and carefully resealed. Nothing was missing. Nothing was damaged. Just touched. Handled by someone who wasn't me. Then I saw the notes. Inside each gift was a small piece of paper, folded once, with handwriting I didn't recognize. I picked up the first one from the jacket box. I've been watching you all year. You weren't good. You weren't bad. You were perfect. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the second note from the headset. December 3rd, you helped that woman pick up her groceries. December 10th, you donated to the homeless man outside the coffee shop. December 17th, you stayed late to help your coworker finish their project. Specific dates, specific actions, things I'd done, small kindnesses I'd barely thought about afterward. Someone had been watching me, cataloging my behavior, keeping track. The third note was worse. I've been inside your apartment 7 times while you were sleeping. You never even woke up. I dropped the paper like it had burned me. 7 times. Someone had broken into my apartment 7 different times while I was asleep in the next room, and I'd never known. I ran to my door. Locked, chain still in place. I checked my windows, all locked. My sliding balcony door locked. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere. I grabbed my phone and pulled up my security camera app. I'd installed a camera in my living room a few months earlier, one of those smart home cameras that records motion. I rewound the footage to last night. 11:47 p.m. I walk through the frame toward my bedroom, turn off the living room light. 12:03 a.m. The room is dark. Nothing moves. 2:14 a.m. A figure appears in the frame. I paused the video, my heart hammering. Someone was standing in my living room in the middle of the night. But how? Every entrance was locked. I watched as the figure moved slowly through the room, calm and unhurried. They went to the tree, knelt down, and began unwrapping the first gift. They took their time, carefully removing the paper, opening the box, examining the contents. Then they put it all back together and moved to the next gift. The whole process took almost an hour, and during that entire time, I'd been asleep 15 feet away behind a door that didn't have a lock on it. The figure never looked toward the camera. Their face was always angled away or obscured. They wore dark clothing, gloves, and moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. At 3:17 a.m., they stood up, looked toward my bedroom door for a long moment, then walked out of frame. The timestamp showed them leaving the same way they came, but I couldn't see where that was. The camera didn't cover my entryway. I called 911 immediately, told them someone had broken into my apartment while I was sleeping, that I had video evidence. Police arrived within 20 minutes. They searched my apartment thoroughly, checked every possible entry point. The detective in charge, a woman named Martinez, was professional but clearly disturbed by the video footage. She asked me to send it to her phone right away. They dusted for fingerprints on the gifts, the doorknobs, the windows. Nothing. Whoever it was had been careful, wearing gloves the whole time. Detective Martinez read the notes and her expression grew more concerned with each one. These dates and details, are they accurate? I confirmed they were. Every incident mentioned in the notes had actually happened. Someone had been following me, watching me, for at least a month, maybe longer. They checked my locks, my windows, my balcony. Everything was secure and showed no signs of tampering. But Martinez pointed something out that made my blood run cold. Your balcony is accessible from the roof. If someone climbed down from the floor above, they could reach it. And your sliding door, the lock is engaged now, but are you certain you locked it before bed? I thought I had. I always did. But could I be absolutely certain? I'd been tired, a little buzzed. Maybe I'd forgotten. But that didn't explain how they got in 7 times, or how they'd been watching me for weeks without me noticing. The investigation revealed something worse. They pulled security footage from my building's entrance. Over the past month, the same person had been caught on camera multiple times, entering the building using what looked like a key fob. They dressed differently each time, wore hats and sunglasses, but their build and movement patterns matched. The building manager confirmed that one of the master key fobs had gone missing 2 months earlier. They'd assumed it was misplaced and had the locks reprogrammed, but apparently, someone had made a copy before it was reported lost. Detective Martinez asked if I'd noticed anyone paying unusual attention to me, following me, showing up in places unexpectedly. I couldn't think of anyone. I worked from home most days, kept to myself, had a small social circle. Nobody stood out as suspicious. They installed better locks on my door, gave me a door jamb security bar, told me to be vigilant. But they were honest with me. Without a clear suspect, there wasn't much they could do except increase patrols in the area and hope the person made a mistake. I didn't stay in that apartment after that. Couldn't. I broke my lease, paid the penalty, and moved to a different building across town. A place with better security, a doorman, cameras in every hallway. But even now, in my new place, I don't feel safe. I check every lock multiple times before bed. I installed cameras in every room. I wake up constantly during the night, listening for sounds that don't belong. Because the worst part isn't what they did. It's what they said. You were perfect. They weren't angry. They weren't trying to punish me. They were admiring me, rewarding me in their twisted way by showing me how close they could get, how much they knew, how easily they could reach me. The police never found them. The investigation is still technically open, but I know it's gone cold. Whoever did this is still out there. Maybe they've moved on to someone else. Maybe they're still watching me from a distance, waiting. I don't buy myself Christmas presents anymore. I don't even put up a tree. December has become a month I just try to survive, counting down the days until January when I can pretend everything is normal again. But I know it's not. I know that somewhere out there is someone who thinks I'm perfect, who's been inside my home while I slept, who knows things about me I didn't think anyone was paying attention to. And the most terrifying part is that I'll never know who they are. They could be anyone. The person in line behind me at the grocery store. Someone who passes me on the street. A neighbor I've never met. They know my face. They know my name. They know where I live. And I know nothing about them except that they think I'm perfect. Merry Christmas. Finally, Christmas should be about joy, family, and warmth. But for these 9 people, it became a reminder that horror doesn't take holidays. It waits in the dark, wearing a smile, humming a carol, leaving gifts we never asked for. The scariest stories aren't the ones we make up. They're the ones that actually happened to real people in real places during a season when we're supposed to feel safe. Stay safe this December. Lock your doors. Check your windows. And if someone knocks late on Christmas Eve, maybe don't answer. Because sometimes the person in the Santa suit isn't spreading joy. Sometimes the carol you hear isn't coming from carolers. Sometimes the gift under your tree was never meant for you. These 9 stories are true. The names have been changed, but the events happened. And somewhere out there, the people who caused them are still walking around, waiting for next Christmas. Sweet dreams.